Welcome to Small Talk, where each week we sit down to discuss the sermon-based small group questions at Wallula Christian Church.
Hello and welcome back to Wallula's weekly podcast, Small Talk. My name is Zach Boland, student pastor here at Wallula Christian Church. I am joined by Craig Archer, our worship pastor, and Lance Kaufman, our lead pastor. We are glad that you are with us today. We have finished our series on Hebrews, and we're starting a short 3-week series. I always say like money, but it's not really about money. I know like this one wasn't specifically, it's like generosity, but is there an overarching theme for the next 3 weeks?
Well, it is a little bit about money.
Right.
So week 1 is about giving, and week 2 will be about prayer, though, and just things that go along with, how do we handle the stress associated with finances and stuff. And so to be generous and to pray, and then the last week will be about not worrying, not being anxious. So
Yeah. Very good. And so today we'll be looking at Matthew, chapter 6, chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. This is part of the Sermon on the Mount. The sermon was Be Willing to Share. And we'll be diving into that today, but we have a fun question, and probably of all the questions, this is one that rings true for me. Sometimes the questions are kind of out there and you're like, I've never thought of this, but I've thought of this a lot and talked about this a lot. And you're just talking to your friends or whatever, but what is the most embarrassing thing that happened to you in high school or at any other time? So just, everyone has a story to tell about something in their life. And I have, told stories to friends or heard their stories, and it's always kind of fun to hear, how they grew up. So Craig, I'm going to start it with you. What do you have as your most embarrassing?
Okay. I'm going to skip the high school portion. I'm going to go college, K-State. And this was when I was in the K-State marching band. And we, when I first joined, there were, it was like the first time there was like extra people. There was like too many people signing up for the marching band.
Right.
Got too big, so we had like spots to challenge on the field and stuff. So we would do like playing tests, and there's always like pressure to like, you gotta memorize your music and have it ready to go for Saturday's game and stuff. And this was my first year in the marching band, and I got the spot on the field, and so I'd been marching for a while. And then there was a show like throughout the season, you learn probably, I think it's like 5 different marching band shows, and we rotate through them throughout the season. And so there's a lot of music to memorize. And this particular year, the person that was writing the music, I feel like he did not do a good job of helping us out with memorizing it, because it wasn't very repetitive. And it was just, I don't know. It was hard for me to like wrap my mind around memorizing it. It was just a lot of work. And I don't know if it was probably just like a busy time in the semester or something. I was really struggling with getting it memorized. And so it came game day, and like going into it, I knew, I was like, this is not good. This is going to be bad. And so we were like running through the music before the game started and stuff. And then I was just fumbling through it, and then I got the call that I'm not going to be in the halftime show. And so I'm in the stands playing and stuff, but halftime comes, and me and my roommate just sit there in the stands while everyone else is out on the field. And when the whole student, or not the student section, when the whole band area, that's like 400 people is gone,
Right.
and you're just sitting there.
Is it just you two?
There was a few others.
Okay. But you're all like scattered in this
this huge
it's
portion
very lonely.
is just gone, and you're just sitting there watching everyone else perform. That was pretty embarrassing.
Yeah.
I did not like that feeling.
Right.
And, it did motivate me to do better next time, which is good. But, man, just sitting there while everyone else is going out on the field.
In the stands of shame.
It definitely felt like here's your little shame section for the next 10 minutes.
Yeah, I guess that is a good motivator.
I didn't like that.
Yeah.
Did not feel good.
That's how things like embarrassment work, though, because it would be embarrassing with your peers, with the band members, right? That, I didn't do my part and all that stuff. That would be embarrassing. But then you pile on yourself because you're sitting there and I'm sure you're thinking, oh, look, these 40,000 people are looking at me. And that's probably not
you're still
true.
surrounded by a lot more.
Nobody cares. They're like, what? Maybe somebody
He's
looks
not the
over,
cool guy in band.
and wonder, why are there 6 band members left over there?
Yeah.
But then they're like, who cares?
Just put on a fake cast, and they'll be like, he's hurt. That's why.
Exactly.
But that's how embarrassment works. We pile onto ourselves. And,
Yep.
Yeah.
I was all in my head about it.
It's a good motivator.
Yeah.
What did you have, Lance?
Oh, I mean, I'm sure there's so many things I've done that I should be embarrassed by, but I was trying to think back to high school, because that's what the question sort of asks, and maybe I said high school to try to take some of the heat off. You don't not what
Instead
you
of
did.
recently.
Yeah, what did you do last week that made you look like
this can be excused. You were just a kid,
right? And so I was thinking about high school, and I'm not sure. The best I could come up with is that my sophomore year I was taking this PE class. And one day, our teacher said, "Look, we've got to set up for the gymnastics meet tonight." And so a couple things. That was the day I learned that our high school had a gymnastics team.
Okay.
Right.
And you're the setup crew.
And it was the day I learned that our PE teacher, that she was the gymnastics coach.
Okay.
And that now we were helping to set up for which is fine. But, it was a sort of deal where we were putting mats out and laying all that stuff out. And one of the things we had to do is we had to move the mat from the wrestling room that they were going to use for the floor exercise or whatever it was, And so we had to roll up this wrestling mat and move it from the wrestling room out to the regular gymnasium, into the gymnasium for that meet. And there were several kids rolling up the mat, and I was really left without a job, sort of thing, goofing off, and so I got in front of where they were rolling up, and I was like, "Hey, back up, back up, back up," like that, and my foot got caught under the mat as they were rolling it up, and I went down, and I was goofing off, and so I think that they thought, he's acting the fool, he's goofing off, and until they rolled my leg all the way up into the mat and pop, or pop, and then they stopped, and we all stopped because I went, sort of thing. And so that's embarrassing.
Your
Goofing
gymnastics
off,
injury?
Yeah, I don't have it wasn't the old football injury, or anything that you could be proud of. Just
you weren't even working.
No, doing absolutely
the person
nothing
doing no
of
help
value.
is still the one who got injured.
Right. Yes.
So did you have to go to the doctor, or did you what did they say?
No surgery. I had to wear one of those long leg braces.
Oh, and then you get to tell the
physical
story.
Therapy. Yes.
Everyone wants to know.
You're around on crutches,
right?
And what happened?
Yeah.
Well, see.
First off, lower your expectations.
Yes. Yeah.
That's funny. I have a lot of stories, and I made lists.
What's funny is you already told a lot of them to me.
I don't think you know this one.
I was thinking, which one is he going to
tell?
I
know. Well, and that's the thing. Like, I've told a lot to the students just because there's just in a lesson or something, I'm like, oh, this reminds me of this. And so I had 3. These are my 3 top. I'm not going to tell them all, but there's one in high school, one in college, and one right after college.
Can I guess one of them real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
What about the one when you went to the John Mayer concert?
No, that wasn't even one of them. That didn't even make it. No. So they're titled Denture Cup in high school, Trophy Case in college, and Anne Frank after college. And the reason I had these down is because these are the ones where I know.
I like how they have titles.
Because
I didn't title mine.
This is how I had to remind myself. But all 3 of these, I'm like, this is the most embarrassed and whatever.
Right.
I felt like I actually, because a lot of times I'll do dumb stuff, and it's like what the John Mayer thing. Like, I wasn't really embarrassed, but anyway.
It sort of feels, Zach, like you live your life in sitcom titles.
Sometimes it does. Like, I think it's normal, and then
episodes.
Someone will say something like, that reminds me of this. And they're like, what? And so I'm going to tell you my one high school story, Denture Cup, and maybe later on, if another question comes up for in another podcast, Trophy Caser and Frank. But so this is the most embarrassing thing that has ever happened to me in high school. I really liked this girl, and I wanted to take her to prom my senior year. I had never had a girlfriend in high school. Most of my friends were girls. I was comfortable talking with. I would talk to girls like I talk to you guys, and so I was super friendly. And I was just like, but I don't like it. It's just friends, whatever. But this is the first time I wanted to take a girl. I'd always taken to all the dances I've been to. It was like a friend from youth group, and so just as friends. That's all. And I made sure they knew that. But now I'm like, I've never asked a girl out that I liked, that I had a crush on. And so so this girl named Talitha, her parents were religious. And so from, I think, Talitha Cum, from when Jesus raised the little girl. That's what he said. Anyway, really liked her. And I went up and we were friends. And so I was like, I'm going to ask her. So I went up like on a Monday and I said, hey, how's it going? And she's like, fine. I was just so nervous. And I was like, cool. And then we just talked about whatever. And then I was like, all right. And I chickened out. And I did that every day. Every day I went up to her for the whole week. And I was like, I forced myself to go talk to her and I couldn't say it. And so Friday comes along and I'm like, I've got to ask her because I can't do this again on Monday. So I was like, hey, would you like to go? And she's like, oh, well, I'll have to ask my dad. And I said, okay, cool. And then I left. I was like, sweet, it's not a no. And so that, like, I go home and I'm like the whole weekend, I'm like, she's calling any minute, right? And no, she didn't call at all. And I was like, no problem. We could talk on Monday. So I get there on Monday and I'm like, I'm so nervous. And I'm like looking around trying to find her and I can't find her. And I was an office aide. So I worked in the office during third period. And so I did a little investigation or stalking and I found the absentee and she wasn't there. And I was like, oh, so I get home and my dad they all know, like they know I'm doing this. And so he says, how'd it go? And I said, oh, she's not sick. And he's like, Zach, you've got to get an answer. This has already been a week. And you know what it's like for your sister when someone asks her last minute. If she tells you no, then you're going to have to find someone else. And whatever girl you ask is going to have to rush to try to find a dress. And so it gave me enough confidence to be like, you're right. I do need to find out. What am I doing? Let's just be a man and call. So I called her up and her mom's like, oh, she's not here right now. She was sick today, but she's feeling better. And so she's at work and she gets off at 8. I was like, okay, cool. Thanks. And she worked at CVS down in Leavenworth and I worked at Kmart. And so I was like, perfect. I get off at 7:30. I'll go over there and see her. And I worked in the Kmart pharmacy. And so 7:30 I get off. I go over there. And CVS, you have to understand, like, it's like a box store. So you just walk down the middle aisle and you can look left and right and see the whole thing. So I walk in. She's not at the cash registers. I walk down every aisle and she's not there. And I finally see her in the back corner. She's talking with some friends. And I was like, I'm going to hold off for a second because I don't want to bust up and be like, so are we going or not? So I decide I'm going to just hang out. And as I'm just sort of waiting for her to be done talking, wandering the store, it starts to hit me like, this is kind of weird. Like, I came all the way to your work to find out, are we going to prom or not? And then I started to really second guess, like, I'm going to see her tomorrow. Couldn't I have just waited? And then I was thinking, oh, man, she's going to think I'm weird for this. So I had this plan. I know what I'll do. I'll pretend like I'm shopping. Yeah. I'll accidentally run into her. We'll strike up this conversation, and then I'll bring it up. I was like, this is perfect. So what do I need from here? And I was like, where do I want to be caught? Where do I want her to find me? So I'm in CVS. So I remember I just stood in front of the razors. Like, I need to get some, this is what a man does. I need to, yeah. Right. I came from Kmart, by the way. So it's not like we didn't have those there, but they call her on the intercom. She walks right, I'm in the side aisle. She walks right past me, doesn't see her. And she doesn't see me, and so she's working the register. So I'm like peeking around the corner, waiting for there to be no line so I can just have time with her. So I walk past her like I don't see her, and she's like, hey, Zach, like real happy to see me. And I was like, it's a yes. Oh, man, this is going to be so great. So I'm like, oh, hey, Talitha. Oh, yeah, I forgot you worked here. Oh, man, it was so lame. And so we start talking, and it's like an amazing conversation. And I'm like, this is a done deal. And so then, like, it just dawns on me. I go, oh, wait, what did your dad end up saying about prom? And she gets real quiet. And she goes, oh, well, I didn't think anyone was going to ask me. So I was planning on going with a guy from my hometown because she had just moved to the area or the previous semester from Manhattan. And I was like, oh, that's okay. Yeah, that's fine because you're not going to show disappointment. And so then you have to pause for 1 second. In my mind, what I'm thinking of is, well, we're done here. Might as well get out of here. And then I immediately think, oh, wait a minute, you can't leave. You're supposed to be shopping. And then I think, well, say something. And so I blurt out the first thing that comes to mind because there's this awkward silence. Before I tell you what I blurted out, I need you to understand, earlier that day, an old lady came to the pharmacy and said, do you guys have any denture cups? And the pharmacist said, no, but try CVS. And so fast forward, she says, I don't want to go with you. And I'm like, oh, that's fine. And then just wait. Hey, do you guys have any denture cups? And she goes, what? I said, well, they're not for me, but that's why I came here. I really need to get these denture cups. And she's like, I don't know. And so she left to go find the manager. And I'm just thinking, get out of there. What are you doing? And I think, no, you can't, because if you leave now, it's going to be really embarrassing. So the manager comes out, and I have to sell it. And he's like, what can I help you with? And I was like, yeah, I need some denture cups, like really confident in this. And I knew they didn't have them because Kmart doesn't have them, and we're way bigger. And he's like, yeah, aisle 10. And I said, oh, great, thanks. And I walked back thinking, what are denture cups? I don't even know what I'm buying. I don't know how expensive these things are. So I go back and literally, for people who have dentures, when they go to bed, right, they take their dentures out and they put them in this like plasticky $5 denture shaped cup that you could soak them. Mm-hmm. Why would I need this thing? Why on earth am I like, this is why I'm here? So I grab these denture cups and I have to go buy them from her. I'm like, here you go. And she's like, okay. And, it rings me up and I have to now pay for this. And I walk in there wanting a date for prom, and I leave there with some denture cups. Mm-hmm. And I ended up going to prom with a friend from youth group, just like every other dance. And that was I don't even know. She probably has no idea how, like, I'm 43 years old, and it's burned into my to my core how embarrassing that was. So.
What'd you do with the denture cups?
Oh, dude, I have no idea. That would be so awesome. If I knew I was gonna be a pastor, I could show them during a lesson or something. But yeah, that was just the dumbest thing I've ever said. And anyway, that's my story. That's my high school denture cup story.
Denture cups.
Yeah, you should have saved the denture cups.
I should have.
With her senior picture or something.
I know.
Just put the senior picture in the denture cup.
Something. It's like a monument.
Here, kids, let me tell you.
Let me tell you a story. Oh man, I'm getting like nervous telling that story again just because of like it's just so awkward. Talitha, yeah. So, yep. So anyway, that's that story.
That was pretty good.
Yeah. Oh man, I gotta calm down now. That's rough. It was just because you like a girl.
Right.
And you're like putting it all in it, and then it just not only like no, but also just something so stupid. Anyway.
So the real question is, do you think she had did she have an actual date from
Here's the deal.
in Manhattan? Or
there's more to the story, but I didn't want to keep going because that was the embarrassing part. And I'm like, I knew the story was going to be long. That's why I went last, because I knew my story was going to be longer than both of yours.
Yeah.
So if you want to know the second part of the story, I'll tell this quickly. She ends up, first off, she has no idea how embarrassing it was. So we're still friends. We still talk at school. And I end up getting a date and whatever. Mm-hmm. She leaves CVS and starts working at Kmart. And so we're friends again. It's all normal. And a week before prom, I'm like, so where are you guys going out to eat? And she goes, oh, Jarek and I are going to go to Cheesecake Factory or something. Jarek, by the way. Jarek is a really unique name that we have one Jarek in our school. And I was like, Jarek Tony? And she goes, yeah. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And I was just like, all this stuff. And she goes, and she could read that I was like shut down. And she goes, yeah, my dad didn't want me going with someone like from Manhattan, it's too, and so I ended up going with someone here. I was like, oh yeah, no, that's totally cool. And then she said probably the worst thing she could have said to me. She goes, yeah, I was going to ask you, but you had already asked someone else. And I was like, she means nothing to me. It doesn't matter. Like, I thought, oh, she was going to ask me. Oh man, and I was like, Oh, that hurts. That hurts so much. Like we could have gone together. This girl that I like, that she was going to ask me, and so yeah, it wasn't meant to be. So anyway, anything else you want to know? I could keep going, but there's another part to the story. Maybe for another time. I'll fill you in after this is all over, but
Bonus episode.
something like that behind the scenes. But yeah, there's Talitha. Anyway,
All right.
high
Do you
school.
know what happened to this girl?
She ended up going to.
Is she still blaming her life decisions on her father? Is
No.
everything is her dad's
No.
fault? Dad wouldn't let me. Dad said.
No,
Dad.
no. She ended up moving to Colorado, and that's all I know.
Oh.
And that was it. But we I mean, like we literally that was in May, and then I graduated, went to Ozark, and then
Right.
so, and then you don't talk to any of your high school friends after that. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Let's have her open marijuana dispensary in Boulder.
that's what you're gonna.
just to wrap up the story.
That's what
Let's
you're gonna
have her,
say.
Yeah, something like that.
So I'm not missing out. It's probably
Nah,
it probably
she's-
wouldn't have worked out anyway.
She's off the. Anyway.
All right. Well, thank you for indulging me. Let's jump into the actual reason we're here, which is going through the questions. Matthew chapter 6. Be willing to share. And we're looking at, so Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7 are the Sermon on the Mount. And so even though we were in Matthew 6, question number 1, it says, look back to Matthew chapter 5, the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. And it says, what kind of topics are covered by Jesus to begin his most famous sermon? And how are those topics that follow in Matthew chapter 6 the same? And how are they different? So we're comparing the ideas from both chapters for both of those. And I'll go first on this. I'd never been asked. I never thought about this. For as famous as the Sermon on the Mount is, I'd never really compared the chapters. I just always, when I'm talking to the students, I'm like, there's so many topics that Jesus covers within this thing, and the idea of like, what similarities do you see? And so I just made this list of, in chapter 5, the Beatitudes and salt and light, about Jesus fulfilling the law and murder and adultery and divorce and oaths and eye for an eye and loving your enemies. And then chapter 6 is like giving to the needy and prayer and fasting and your treasures in heaven and not worrying. And I'm like, what kind of comparisons are there? And when I looked at it, so what I thought of was a big idea of how they're the same is that it has to do with the heart. Yeah. So you have all these things going on of like murder, adultery, giving to the needy, prayer, fasting. And what Jesus does is he takes these big ideas, both in 5 and 6 and 7, and these ideas that everyone knows and has been taught for hundreds of years, thousands of years in the Old Testament of like, this is how you're supposed to live and what to do and what not to do. And Jesus flips it on its head. And he says, it's not just about doing this or not doing this, but it's about your heart or your spirit or your intention behind it. And so, so I recognize that as the similarity between these two things. And one of the things that popped out when I looked at the differences was in chapter 5, we see a lot of the negative things that you're not supposed to do, like murder, adultery, divorce, or enemies, like how you treat your enemies. And he flips that. You should not murder, but if you have hatred in your heart, then you're committing murder. You're not supposed to commit adultery, but if you have a lust, right? And then in chapter 6, the difference is it goes from negative to positive. So these are the good things that people do, giving and praying and fasting. And once again, he flips those on its head. And so he challenges them on the things that they think they're doing right by not sinning and also helping others. And he says, in both cases, we could be missing the point. And what is your heart like in each of these things by what you do and don't do? Yeah. And so that's kind of the stuff that came to my mind when I was looking at those two chapters. What about you, Craig?
Yeah, definitely. I like your comparison because that is something that we don't think about as much as just how these chapters relate and how they're different from each other. But I was thinking a lot of just the beginning and the Beatitudes and some of the things we see in there. And you mentioned it already. It's the attitude of your heart, and that's what needs to drive, like what's the instructions we see in the beginning of chapter 6 in generosity, it stems from a lot of these other things. And if you, like, you name some of them, like seeking after righteousness is mentioned a few times, coming from like a place of like humbleness, like being meek, showing mercy, and you mentioned salt and light. And a lot of this is, like you said, it's your intentions are coming from the heart, and it stems from your relationship with God and how you've experienced him in your life. And I just think, well, like generosity, we experience that in the gospel through Jesus, because of Jesus' sacrifice and resurrection. Like, God is so patient with us and generous to have us be part of his kingdom and bring us into his family and welcome us in. And he meets us in a place where we need him when we're sinful, and we respond to him. And so I think generosity, like our generosity, is a reaction or a response to what we've been given through him. And so like being, like Jesus instructs us to be like lights into the world, like being a reflection of who God is and who Jesus is. And so that's like really like the Sermon on the Mount is like really pointed teachings on like how do you live as a citizen of God's kingdom. And so this is one aspect of that, is showing your generosity. And so yeah, that generosity, that action of being generous, it points back to like so many different words in here. Like even like, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Like, what does it look like to be a peacemaker? And like generosity plays into that.
Yeah.
Like we were talking, like my kids this morning, we asked Ava, are you being a peacemaker with your sister? Like, what does that look like? Like sharing your toys and like that sort of thing. Like you're being generous.
Right.
So it kind of plays into a lot of different heart issues that are mentioned through the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah. Yeah, we have this sort of filter of Jesus now, as opposed to just do this or don't do this. But it's like, because Jesus did this for us, how do we treat our enemies, but also those that are in need? And it's through the light of Jesus.
Right.
What about you, Lance?
Yeah, I think those were good summaries of chapters 5 and 6. And really, you guys are right. Everything boils down to, in these chapters, to the heart, to your motivation behind them. And, Sunday we talked a little bit about, having that audience of one and God alone, and, you can't be motivated by what men think. And I guess as I approached this question, I thought about kind of the difference there that we talked on Sunday about as well in Matthew 5, 16, where he talks about being salt and light and letting your light shine before men. And then Matthew 6:1, where he says, don't practice these acts of righteousness so that men can see them, right? And so the difference there. And so I thought, well, let's get a little more context, right? Let's expand back a little further into chapter 5. And right before that discussion about salt and light, you get the tail end of the Beatitudes, right? You get this verse 11 and 12 in Matthew chapter 5, which says, blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. And so what follows then in this discussion of being salt and light, letting your light shine before men, is in the context of being persecuted. When people are accusing you of something, when people are leaving you out, when people are calling you names, when people are diminishing you for following Jesus, then that's when you let your light shine. You want to do these things to show off the glory of God, and then you get to chapter 6, and it's like, okay, now, when that's kind of diminished, when you're inside this circle, the folks who are in the family already, then your motivation can't be that either. And you get a little more context. You go, we'll be here in a few weeks, but verse 19 of chapter 6, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor dust nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. And so when you think about it, the bulk of chapter 5 and the bulk of chapter 6 is all about, choosing which reward you'll reap, right? Which reward are you going to gather? Are you going to take the earthly reward that kind of you're guaranteed here, what you're getting, or are you going to lay up treasures in heaven? Are you going to take that heavenly reward? And so to me, that's kind of the similarities and differences there of chapters 5 and 6.
Yeah. As we move on, we were kind of talking the difference between questions 4 and 6, and so I'm going to read them all. I'm going to read them both back to back, and you guys can decide kind of how you want to answer that. But number 4 says, how easy is it to slip into the habit of doing things to impress others instead of doing them for God? And why do you think we want to impress others? Like, why do we have that in us? And then 6 is, why do you think that Jesus stresses giving in secret, and what does that look like? And so they're obviously connected here. Craig, what did you have for one of those two?
Yeah, I focused more on the first one, and I think if you look on social media, this question made me think about on social media when people, I don't know if I see it as much anymore, but like if people would give like a generous tip to a server at a restaurant, they would have their phone out while they do it.
To see the response of,
because they want to post it, so they can get the comments, and it just made me think of that, how quick the response is from people when you do good things, and that makes you feel good in the moment, but then it's like, okay, well, what's next? That sort of thing, and that's why it's so tempting or easy. Because it's like the instant gratification type of response, and but in the long run, like it's temporary, and what people think of you doesn't really stand up against what God thinks of you. It made me think of a quote. There's a book I read at the beginning of this year by Josh White. He's a pastor in Portland, called "Stumbling Toward Eternity," and it focuses on the last moments of Jesus on the cross. And like the last words and like the interaction between him and the thieves. And so in the book, he uses this term called ladder theology. He uses it a lot, talking about how we try to climb the ladder of like human performance or other people giving us like praises and that sort of thing. And this quote I think is really good. It says, "Our satisfaction will never be found on the ladder of human effort. Instead, it will be found in our daily surrender to the one who descended into the depths of human brokenness." And it keeps going, but it's this idea that the ladder of trying to please people or doing things for people's reactions, it's an endless ladder that just keeps going. You just every time you step, the ladder you look up and it's just going to keep going and going, and there's no end to it. But it's completely meaningless. And he juxtaposes that throughout the book, how we pursue these meaningless things and it does no good for us. But when we instead look at Jesus and surrender our life to him, like he's the ladder in quotations that we climb into eternity. Like he did all the work. And so kind of like I said in the first question, when we do things out of a response to who Jesus is and what he's done for us, that's the reward we need. And that's the ultimate reward. And so, it's that same thing. It stems from our relationship with God. And I think that's the one thing that, like, we talk about that a lot on the podcast. I feel like as I was thinking about this question is making sure that we maintain that relationship with God, because that is our source for our actions, participating in his kingdom, and working for him. And so when we, if we're, quiet time, spending time in prayer, maintaining that relationship. If we ignore those things, that's when it becomes easy to get distracted and our mind gets off track and we think, oh, I could do this and like please someone else. And so maintaining that relationship, being centered on him is so important for this topic.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, when I kind of leaned into number 4, but like how easy is it to slip into the habit of doing things to impress others instead of God? And I said very easy, especially if you're a Christian. Because as a Christian, we naturally, there's so many opportunities to serve, both in the church and out of the church. And so it is, if we're trying at all, we're already serving in some way. Even if it's like, hey, can you stay after and help stack chairs, right? Or helping out with their Thursday or the shelter or helping set up. There's just all these things that we can do. And so we are already in a position of serving others. And so we have that. But the thing is, it's not about the act of service itself, but like Jesus said, it's the heart behind it. And so I tell the students this: you can have 2 people doing the exact same thing, serving in the exact same way, and one is doing it because of a desire to honor Jesus, to become like him, and to help others, and someone else is doing it for, hey, I have something to talk about. Like, this is what I did, and the act itself is the exact same. It looks the same on the outside, but it can turn to sort of a self-inflated thing, right? And so I think it's very easy because anytime we serve, and maybe you even start by doing it for good reasons, and then you realize, oh, this gets me more clout, or this gets me. Social media is one that I thought of immediately, and there's this. I'm going to say this not because I believe it, but I know there's a cynical nature to it. But like if you go on a mission trip. And you take pictures of like you doing whatever with these impoverished kids or whatever else, and then all of a sudden it's like there can be a pushback of, are you doing this just for getting the likes? And I don't necessarily believe that anytime someone does that, so a lot of times having gone on these trips, it really is an amazing experience for the people going, and it's transformative, but you still get those likes, and then you have to realize, hey, I posted this and I do like those, and so then you have to really guard yourself against something like that. And then the bigger question that I really liked about it is, why do we do this? Like, why do we like to impress others? And this need to be approved by others to feel good about ourselves. And I thought about the idea of just contentment that we have, that even comes from Scripture, and what I gathered was like contentment is where my self-worth comes from God. Like, hey, if I'm following God and honoring Jesus, I'm good.
Yeah,
that's all I need. That I'm totally acceptable and accepted by Him because of Christ. And so I'm good there. But because of sin and because of brokenness and because of the fall, if we don't have this connection, like we want to feel good and normal. And if we don't feel content here, we're going to find it somewhere else. And so we look to other people to give us that validation. I feel lonely, but I get all these likes, and so that makes me feel like I'm doing something and I feel good about myself. And so
kind of reminds me of Shane's book and how we're meant for union in a relationship.
Yeah.
And if that vertical union is not there, then we're going to start to
we're going to find it anywhere else. And so really the whole social media or anything else that we do, it comes from a place of brokenness, because we don't feel comfortable just by ourselves with God. Like, we have to have something else to fill this void. And so it's not, for sure, some people are like, I'm going to get rid of Facebook, I'm going to get rid of social media. And I think that also is very wise if you feel like that's a place where it's unhealthy, but it's still just the symptom, or of what's really deeper. And it's more of just the relationship you have with Christ, and having Him, realizing your self-worth comes from Him, and then through that, other people's opinions are just less valuable. It's like, well, I know what I'm doing is right, or I know that this is what honors God, and so I don't need all this other attention. Anyway, and so I think that's why Jesus stresses doing this in secret. And so because He realizes it's a dangerous thing to seek after the approval of others, because other people's approval is going to change depending on the crowd of what everyone else is doing.
That's true too.
And so you'll just follow that, and that's a dangerous path to go on. But what about you, Lance?
Yeah, you guys, those are great answers, and it's really because we're designed for relationships. One of the most basic of human needs is to be accepted, right? We desire that relationship. We want to fit in. We want to have a family, a team, a community of people around us who believe in us and accept us, and that's why it's so easy to sort of put your eggs in that basket of human approval and to seek it out more and more, and because everybody has that need. And I think you guys are right. If we have that vertical relationship, then we can steady those horizontal relationships. We can steady and temper some of that. And I just I read an article where the author talked about, look, there's some different ways that we seek that approval from people, and he talked about the first way is maybe we hide what we think won't be approved by them, and so he went back to the garden. What happens after the fall? Well, Adam and Eve are hiding in the bush. They cover themselves with fig leaves, right? They hide, and so we try to hide our imperfections. We don't confess our sin,
right?
And we hide it. And then secondly, they talked about, well, if we're not hiding, then maybe we're pretending, to be something we're not, and kind of, we show up to church on Sundays and we act one way, and by the time Wednesday rolls around, we're doing something else. We're doing our own thing. We're pretending. And he talked about Jacob, putting on the sheepskin to act like his brother Esau, and gaining the blessing by pretending to be his brother. And so maybe we hide or we pretend, or for Christians, one of the things we can do and is we just try harder. We add more, like you were talking about, I think, Zach. We add more things to the list of look at what I've done, look at how good a person I am, or whatever, based on these acts of righteousness that we're trying to stack up and get enough chips to live up to. And really what we need is to be covered in the blood and the clothes of Christ. We need that relationship above anything else. And I go back to the Old Testament, to Isaiah. It's kind of a weird place to go, I guess, for this, but Isaiah chapter 61 verse 10 says, "I will greatly rejoice in the Lord. My soul shall exult in my God, for he has clothed me with the garments of salvation." Right? When we have that vertical relationship, then maybe we can avoid some of that hiding or pretending or just trying harder. So we need to be clothed in Jesus more than anything. That's where our identity has to come from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I like what you said about like we either hide or pretend,
right.
And I think both of those are rooted in this sense of like shame. Like,
sure,
no one can know.
Right.
And I think that's one of Satan's biggest things is no one can know. And when you look at, not even with God, but anyway, just like what does it look like to actually have real relationship, like with a spouse or a kid or anything else, like they see how you really are, and there's an authenticity there. And so you can connect. And so when we are trying to hide or pretend, people don't really know us, and so we don't feel as comfortable being ourselves, and we have that expectation for others as well.
Right.
And I think it's just from Satan that he wants to use guilt and shame to have these pretend relationships, so that you don't actually become authentic with others, and also then with God, that you can't open up.
Right.
And so, really good stuff. And I think all of it, I know we're talking about money and stuff like that, but man, it really speaks to the core of the human condition and how God sees us, and then how we can see others and help others. And so I think it was a really good sermon. Really liked it. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us. We will continue on with this series next week. And
All right. Awesome.
Yeah.